So, what actually happens when a superpower decides to just remove the leader of another country? Well, in 2026, we found out. Today, we're diving deep into the story of Operation Absolute Resolve. It all kicks off with this, one single, unbelievable event that sent shockwaves around the entire planet. The moment the U.S. military captured the sitting president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. It was an audacious move, and it literally reshaped the geopolitical map overnight.
Now, you might think something this dramatic just happens out of the blue, right? Nope. An operation like this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It was really the explosive final act in a story that's been building for 100 years. So, to really get why this happened, we've got to go back. We need to trace the long and very tense history between the United States and Venezuela.
Okay, so take a look at this timeline. You can literally watch the relationship just sour over the decades. It all started way back in the 1920s, when U.S. companies helped turn Venezuela into this oil powerhouse. But things took a sharp turn in 1998 with Hugo Chavez, who nationalized the whole industry. Fast forward to 2019, and the U.S. is hitting the Maduro regime with maximum pressure. And then, by 2025, it escalates to a full-on naval blockade. That final move, well, that was pretty much the point of no return.
And all that history, all that friction, it all leads to this. The audacious plan for 2026, which was officially known as Operation Absolute Resolve. The plan itself wasn't just some simple snatch and grab. No, it was this really complex, three-pronged approach aimed at a total power reset. Step 1, a direct decapitation. Sounds intense, right? The goal was to capture Maduro and his inner circle. Step 2 was resource recoupment. The idea was to use Venezuela's oil to pay back billions in debt. And finally, Step 3, the quarantine doctrine, a full military blockade to keep any rivals like Russia, China, or Iran from getting involved.
So what's the big idea behind all of this? Well, people are calling it the Donroe Doctrine. And yeah, that's a direct nod to the old Monroe Doctrine. It was basically the U.S. drawing a line in the sand for the 21st century, signaling that it sees the Western Hemisphere as its own backyard, a huge and direct challenge to its global rivals. Okay, so the mission is a success, right? Maduro's gone. But, as you can probably guess, taking out the leader is often the easy part. Dealing with the aftermath, that's where things get really messy.
On the ground in Venezuela, the extraction created this kind of national whiplash. In fact, analysts are calling it political vertigo. Just try to imagine it. One minute, you're living under this authoritarian rule for years, and the next minute, he's just gone. It's this wild, destabilizing mix of intense relief, deep national trauma, and a totally paralyzing uncertainty about what on earth happens next. And that political vertigo really split the country right down the middle. On one hand, for so many, it was just pure euphoria, a feeling of liberation they had been dreaming of. But for millions of others, it was something else entirely, a profound sense of learned helplessness. After years of the state controlling everything, the big question became a terrifying, so, what now? And the political situation that followed? Oh man, nobody saw this coming. First, Maduro's own vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, gets sworn in as acting president. Okay. But then, and this is the real kicker, the U.S. starts negotiating with her. This completely sidelines the Democratic opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado. You know, the very person the U.S. had championed for years, and who just months earlier had controversially presented her Nobel Peace Prize to the American president. Just, wow. And remember, part 2 of the plan? The resource recoupment? The idea that Venezuela's oil would pay for everything? Yeah, about that. Turns out that was what you might call an oil myth. Just look at this number, $50 to $100 billion. That's the estimated cost just to get the country's oil infrastructure working again. We're talking a decade of work, not some quick payday.
Okay, so that's the complicated situation on the ground. Now let's zoom out and see how the rest of the world reacted, because, spoiler alert, they were not all on the same page. And the global reaction pretty much split along the lines you'd expect. You had one camp, think Latin America, Russia, and China, that was furious. They called it a blatant violation of sovereignty. Then you had the European Union, kind of in the middle, expressing concern and calling for stability. And finally, you had some key Western allies who were, let's say, cautiously supportive, focusing on the end goal of restoring democracy. And all this boils down to two competing theories that experts are debating right now. On one side, you've got the realist view. They'd say this was a necessary surgical strike to stop narco-terrorism and secure the hemisphere. But on the other side, you have what's being called the Putinization theory. And this argument is that the US is basically acting like Putin, ignoring international law to enforce its will and setting a really dangerous precedent that its rivals could use to justify their own aggression.
So that's where we are, which brings us to the biggest, most critical question of all. What happens next?
Because make no mistake, this whole thing is a massive, high-stakes gamble. The potential upside is clear, right? A dictator is removed and a major narco-trafficking network is disrupted. But the risks? They are terrifying. We're talking about the potential for civil war, major geopolitical blowback, and a dangerous economic vacuum for a population that's already on the brink.
And that leaves us with the fundamental question of 2026, one that is going to define international relations for years to come. Can you really deliver democracy with an extraction team? By taking out a leader but negotiating with his successors, the U.S. has gambled on stability over legitimacy. And now the entire world is watching to see if the 21st century will be defined by the rule of law or the return of raw hemispheric power.